let's do our usual. Welcome everyone. Those who know the sound from week to week. This is Alex Volkov. You're listening to ThursdAI, March 7th. I'm an AI evangelist with Weights and Biases, who you can see here on stage as well. You see the little square thing, give it a follow. Follow us on socials as well. And today is obviously Thursday. Thursday was a lot of stuff to talk about. Let's talk about it. I think our week is strange, right? Our week starts at the Friday. Almost, not even Friday. The updates that I need to deliver to you start at the end of the previous ThursdAI. So as something happens and I have a knowledge cutoff, actually at some point we considered calling this podcast knowledge cutoff. I have a knowledge cutoff after Thursday afternoon, let's say, when I start and send the newsletter. But then AI stuff keeps happening. And then we need to start taking notes and taking stock of everything that happened. And I think on Friday, we had the lawsuit from Elon, and there's a whole bunch of stuff to talk about. And then obviously on Monday, we had some big news. So as always, I'm going to just run through all the updates. There's not a... Here's everything we've talked about on ThursdAI, March 7th in 2024, the first ThursdAI in March this year. We started with talking about open source. There's not a lot of stuff to cover in open source. So we did have a breaking news from folks at News. But before that, we've covered that OpenAI open sourced a smaller version of Yi, which we previously covered as Yi-34B, was a very important model. They released a 9 billion parameter Yi model that seems very performative compared to 7B. We discussed how it's very interesting that this category now is around between 7 billion parameters and almost up to 11. We've talked about a new way to train 70 billion parameters at home with home GPUs from folks from AnswerAI called Jeremy Howard and Jonah Whitaker, and Tim Dittmers from QLoRa joined them, and they've combined forces to show how it's possible to train a 70 billion parameter model at home. We also covered Galore, which is a similar GALORE, a similar technique to train like small models on one single GPU with limited RAM as well. And obviously the breaking news that we just had in this area, that News Research released GenStruct 7B, a model that's an instruction generation model designed to create valid instructions giving raw text corpus. We literally just covered this as well. We've talked about some few more open source stuff from the folks who joined us on stage. We had Jan Pelega, a frequent co-host of the pod, that talked about his final attempt at continued training Gemma, the open source or open weights model that Google gave us, on top of a bunch of Hebrew text. And he talked about struggles of how to actually fine-tune Gemma. So if that's interesting to you, this will be in the show notes. And Yam has the deep dive into how to train Gemma. And we also had Vic Hyuntak, a friend of the pod, who released Moondream 2, which is a very tiny 1.6, 1.7 parameter vision language model that you can run on CPU. You don't even have to run a GPU for it. And Vic talked to us about the fact that this model is now commercially licensed because he trained the captions differently, and it's significantly improved benchmark scores and instruction fine-tuning. And this model is like very tiny. So if you need a vision model, Moondream 2 is a good bet for you as well. We went and talked at length at the biggest news of this week, which is Anthropic releasing Claude 3. And with 3 versions, Opus, Sonnet, and Haiku. And we covered its coding capabilities, its longer context. We've covered that it's multimodal right now. The one thing we didn't cover, and I'll just mention, is that they claim there is also function calling, and that's coming soon, so that's not still available. We saw that its UI is now comparable to ChatGPT and costs also $20 an hour, $20 a month. And it's not available in a bunch of countries, but the API is available. So if you do want to try this Opus model, which is not available for free, you have to actually sign up to either the API or the UI. You can do it via their playground, which they call console.anthropic.com. So we've covered how this model now is improving significantly, what previously was known as the fallback from ChatGPT. Longer context, they claim that they will support up to 1 million context window as well. And we've talked at length about different ways in which Claude is less restricted than ChatGPT or GPT-4. It feels a little bit more easier to talk to and less refusals, though we did cover some refusals as well. We then talked about the lawsuit that Elon Musk brought to OpenAI, where he claims that he didn't invest in it to become closed, and facetiously said that if they change their name to ThursdAI, he will drop the lawsuit because he's being a troll, basically. But he did co-found OpenAI. There's a bunch of images and videos recently that popped up, and he also surfaced a bunch of emails. Excuse me. He also surfaced a bunch of emails in which the co-founding happened. And we covered OpenAI's response, where they also released a bunch of emails back and forth. And obviously, in his lawsuit, the emails were in the favor of the lawsuit, and the response, the emails favored the response in OpenAI. And they show that at least in one email exchange, they did discuss about going closed, and specifically around the open in OpenAI does not mean open source everything. This was Ilya's Sutskever's take. The open in OpenAI means releasing these models to people to actually use. And a reminder is that back when those emails were exchanged, there was no other AI that people can use. This was, Google did not release Gemini back then. There was nothing from DeepMind that you can actually use. So just a very important piece of context there. We didn't unfortunately get to, but I'll cover this anyway. There was a charge that Google employee was charged with trading AI secrets to China, and that's a very interesting conversation we didn't get to, unfortunately. But it's been talked about that how these large, big AI companies, as in competition with China, in context with like open sourcing and not open sourcing, that people say that anyway, they probably already, nation states espionage already intervened there. So it's very interesting that in this context, there's now a previous Google employee that was uploading information into his Google Drive, and now he was arrested. And we also talked about Inflection. It was our breaking news today, this morning. Inflection from Mustafa Suleimani, DeepMind's one of the co-founders. They released an upgrade to their underlying agent, Inflection 2.5. They released an update to Pi, and Pi now they claim to be GPT-4 or Gemini equivalent, or very, very close to, while using 40% less resources, or 40% of the resources of GPT-4 training. And that model is now available on the used web search is available for this model. It's not multimodal still, but they claim it's coming very close. I think that's pretty much it what we covered. I will just cover two other things that we didn't get to from Stability. Stability AI released Stable Diffusion 3 research paper, and the model is coming any day now. And based on the research paper alone, it's significantly outperforming Midjourney and Ideogram and basically Playground, every other open and closed source image generation models, which is very interesting based on some testing that they did internally. And they're moving towards diffusion transformers as well, something that we saw in Sora. And we've had Anish from the Hourglass Diffusion Transformers paper talk to us about diffusion transformers. So it looks like the industry is converging towards diffusion transformers, and the two different sides from this industry are converging into one architecture, which is interesting. So Stable Diffusion 3 is not available yet, but probably based on what Imad Mustak, the CEO, said, it's probably going to start sending invites today and is going to be available in their kind of membership. I'm not sure about open weights or not. And Stability AI was also in the news because they released, together with Tripo, they released Tripo SR, which is a fast img-2-3 generation. And we actually have a demo and I play with this a little bit. And it's really cool. You just upload one image and within a few steps, you get a 3D version that looks very interesting. And there was a demo flying around with somebody just doing this thing where they just use Vision Pro and have a bunch of windows open, and they generate an image in one window, drag and drop it, and generate a 3D image of this in another window, take the 3D and drop it in another thing to actually put it in their space. And I thought it was super cool, and actually suggested that somebody combines all these things. So I think that's mostly everything we covered this week on March 7th. Outside of Claude, there hasn't been a huge explosion of news as we're used to, but I think it's still incredible news. We also did have breaking news in the middle. LMSys, the arena folks that measure based on human preference which models are which, is now placing Claude Opus as a third, and even Sonnet, the lower model, is also placed fairly high as well in there. So go play with these models. So I guess let's get into the open source stuff, and then we'll get to the open source and then we'll discuss everything else, because I think the bread and butter of this discussion is going to be Anthropic. Anthropic's coming back to the limelight, but let's start with open source. Open source AI, let's get it started. All right, so I guess Nistan, welcome, and I guess let's start with Galore as much as we can get from the release, a fairly new release as well, and I think it's connecting to the other thing from Answer AI. But let's start with Galore. So basically, these folks released something called Galore, which is playing on the same LoRa, QLoRa stuff. What are some of the techniques they're adding there? I'm trying to take a look as I'm learning. Nistan, do you have any info to share with us about this?
Yeah, same. This is more for an actual full paper reading because I have not read it entirely. Mainly looking at it, again, it looks like it's another stack of tricks like most good projects are, but it enables a very large capability, and that is that now you can make your own full LLM from nothing.
So not a fine-tuned.
Yeah, not a fine-tuned, not initiated weights. You just start from nothing. I see that it uses, like, it offloads a lot of the weight activations and offloads some of them on CPU memory. And I know there are options in Axolotl, which is the Docker container that people use to train, that you can also offload on very fast NVMe drives. So if you have like very fast PCI Express NVMe storage, you can use that as another RAM for the training. So this combines all of those and then some on top. And the end result is very impressive because you can train a very capable model. And again, pending further research and stuff. But I think this is one of those repositories that a lot of people will use, or it's likely to.
Yeah, and I think this adds to this kind of in the same vein of the next thing we're going to chat about. And I actually can't find any mention of this on X, believe it or not. So not everything is fully on X. I just got a link to this from Omar from Hugging Face. And Answer AI is a new research lab that Jeremy Howard, if you guys are not familiar with Jeremy Howard, hopefully everybody is, but if you're not, I guess look him up. Jeremy joined Answer AI, I think around New IPS. He was talking about they got funded, I think $10 million, and they released their first project, a fully open source system that can efficiently train a 70 billion large language model on regular desktop computers with 2 or more gaming GPUs. They're talking about RTX 3090 or 4090, which compared to Nistan, what you just shared, I think that sounds very impressive. They combine FSDP, which is, I'm not familiar with FSDP, with SFDP, and QLoRa, and they brought the CUDA Avengers to the flow. So Jeremy Howard, obviously, I think Fast AI, right? And then Kaggle, I think competition is definitely behind Jeremy. And then they brought Tim Dittmers from QLoRa, and we've covered QLoRa multiple times, very efficient methods. And then they also brought Hugging Face's Tyros von Koller, and they brought the CUDA Avengers in there to basically combine a bunch of techniques to let you train 70 billion parameters. I see we have Yam joining us. Hey, Yam, did you see the Answer AI stuff that I'm covering, or is this new to you?
No, all new to me.
Oh, wow. Okay, so I would love your reaction in real time. And the very interesting idea is that all of these systems and all of these models, 70 billion models, they cost an insane amount of money. And now these folks are considering that under $10,000, you'd be able to train something like 70B at home, which I'm not training models, but I know that some folks here are. And I assume that this is a very big unlocking capability, which is what Answer AI is trying to achieve. Let's see what else is very interesting here. Just something about Answer AI generally. They claim that they're like an unusual type of organization. I actually tried to ask Jeremy a couple times, what does this mean? And they claim to be a for-profit lab, R&D lab, and more in spirit to 19th century labs than today's AI research groups. And I think Eric Ries and Jeremy Howard launched this in Europe. And I think, actually not sure what's the how should I say, what are they up against? But the first release of theirs is an open source OS, fully open source. That includes one of the several of the top people in the industry to create something that wasn't possible before. And I think it's remains to be seen. They didn't release any metrics, but they said, hey, we're about to release some metrics, but this keeps improving from week to week. So we actually didn't release any metrics. Go ahead, Nissan.
Sorry, was this from ThursdAI? They said they were going to release one, or?
They released this open source, I think, already. They didn't release metrics for the training, but I think the whole repo is open source. Yeah.
Oh, they released an open source OS? Or?
Open source OS, FSDP, Q LoRa, and I think they...
Oh, okay. So it's not a real operating system. It's another...
They call it an operating system, but yeah, it's not okay. Like Linux competitive.
Oh, okay. I thought it was like an actual one. Okay, actually, go ahead, because there are some other huge hardware news that I wanted to quickly cover.
Go ahead, actually.
Yeah, just wanted to add about this Answers.ai thing, that they have released this system that you guys were talking about, which basically claims to be able to train 70 billion parameter model on only 224 GB GPUs. So basically 24090s, and you can train a 70 billion parameter model, which is mind-boggling if you think about it. But I tried to find how to get access to this, so I'm still not sure if this is fully supported in every rig and system. So that is something I wanted to mention.
Yeah. So
by the way, that has been doable for a while, because Q LoRa actually trains it all in 4-bit, and there are only a few tricks which you can also apply. If you go to axolotl, the directory, you can also do that on your own. If you do a 4-bit Q LoRa training and you just say offload all the gradients and all this stuff, you can also do that with the 48 gig stuff. But again, I'll look into the actual directory instead.
Nistan, you mentioned some hardware news you want to bring. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so we have two hardware news, but they are actually related. First of all, TensorTorrent, the company by legendary computer scientist Jim Keller, who worked on the iPhone chip, AMD, who brought AMD back to life, legendary computer scientist, and has been working on TensorTorrent, which is another accelerator which also does training. So they released these cards, and I'm not sure what the capabilities are, but I saw that George Hotz from TinyCorp posted them. And they are actually, so I just wanted to give them a big shout out to actually making them commercially viable. And it's just something you can buy. You don't have to set up a UN meeting for it, right? And get the votes and stuff. You can just go and buy it. That's pretty awesome of them. And I wish more companies did that. The second news is also huge, because one of the engineers that left TensorTorrent last year now started a startup here in Toronto. And this has been an idea that's been around for some time, been discussed privately and stuff. They're making AI chips. Again, these ones do not do training, but they're going to make them hard-coded, which will be the judge of how much that makes sense, given how rapidly models improve. But there is a business case there, because the hard-coded chips, they can perform literally 1,000 to 10,000 times faster. So
when you say hard-coded, is that one of those transformer-specific chips, you mean?
No. The entire weights are etched into the chip, and you cannot change them. So the benefit of this is that you can get up to 1,000 to 10,000 times faster inference. So we might end up with a case where, according to calculations from what Sam Altman said on how much ChatGPT serves in a single day, which is 100 billion tokens, and that works out to about 1.4 million tokens per second, we might very soon, like in a year or two or sooner, be in a spot where we have these companies using 60 nanometer chips. We might have a single chip pull the entire token per second performance of all of global ChatGPT use. I don't know if that includes the enterprise use, but that's how fast things are accelerating. So that's the benefit of that's the benefit of going with a hard-coded chip. So inference costs are are dropping
plummeting
in that regard.
You also mentioned George Hotz, and he also went on a rant this week again. And again, I think, do you guys see this? The CEO of AMD that doesn't use Twitter that much, but she replied to one of his demands, I think, live demands, and said, hey, we have a team dedicated working on this. And then we're going to actually make some changes in order to get this through. I love it how George Hotz, folks probably familiar with George Hotz in the audience. Should we do a brief recap of George Hotz? The guy who hacked the first iPhone, the first PlayStation, then built a startup called AI to compete with autonomous driving, and now is building Tiny. We mentioned Tiny boxes ready to ship Nistan last time. I think that paused because they said, hey, we don't have enough of the open sourcing of the internal stack of AMD, which led the CEO of AMD, Lisa, I'm very bad with names, to reply and say, hey, we have dedicated teams working on this. Actually, do want to go find this tweet.
Yeah, so there has been a big misconception in the software industry that a lot of the code monkey work is something that, you just hire someone to clean your toilets and do it. But in fact, the reason that NVIDIA has a $2 trillion valuation and now beat Saudi Aramco is because that their toilets are a lot cleaner in terms of the software. The CUDA software is a lot more workable, and you can do stuff with it, and it doesn't have the bugs. In essence, what George Hotz is doing by pushing to open source some key parts, which some people might freak out that China might steal them, but they've already stolen everything. It really doesn't matter that they're very small hardware parts, but they make a huge difference in developers being able to use that software. And those parts are buggy. In essence, George Hotz, with this stupid code monkey fix, might double or triple AMD's stock price.
Yep.
Just because he's getting in there and he's cleaning that crap code out.
And he's popular enough to pull attention from the CEO of this company to actually come and react. And one of the reasons I love X is that I think she radioed their official tweet. I think there's more folks commenting on and reacting to her comment, and that's on top of the space now than the actual kind of tweet itself, which is, I think, a good type of ratio. Yeah. I think more hardware news. I think we're satisfied with. Oh, yeah. The only other hardware news related to this, because Nistan, I think you mentioned Saudi Aramco. We chatted with the Grok folks, with the Q, not with the K. Grok, the LPU chip, and their like super fast inference speed. And I think this week they showed that they have a collaboration with, I think, said Saudi Aramco about bringing AI. And I saw a few folks post about this. And if that's of interest to you, we had a full conversation with the Grok team. They also they had a wait list, and many people, I think their wait list jumped after we chatted with them at the peak of their very viral week, which started with Matt Schumer going off. And then I think they said something about they had 50 or 100 waitlist signups before this. And then the week after, they had 3,600 a day or something like this. So they revamped the whole system. And now you can actually sign up with a self-serve portal to Grok. And let me see if I can find this tweet for you. So you can actually now go and sign up to Grok yourself. They have a nice console, very reminiscent for every other console out there. You can create an API key, very simple. So no longer like a manual approval of Grok.
Yeah, just really quickly, the part that I missed was that the fix that George Hotz is doing for AMD, that's to enable distributed training, because they cannot distribute training across GPUs because it crashes. So it's pretty important. Yeah, and those are my comments on that.
Awesome. Okay, so I found the tweet. So if you follow this tweet, the quoted tweet there is getting you to the Grok console. You get 2 weeks for free, and you get the API access to this like incredibly fast inference machine from Grok.
Also,
okay, yeah, go ahead.
Grok has a white paper out about how they've designed their chips, and it's super interesting. I'd strongly recommend everyone go read it. They've basically from the ground up rethought how inference-oriented compute should work. It's a fascinating read, and surprising that they're sharing all of those details. One would think they'd keep it proprietary.
Yeah, we had a full conversation with them. It is fascinating. Again, for the level of discussion that we have here, we honestly, we couldn't dive like super, super deep. But I've played with it, and the demos I was able to do, Vic, I don't know if you had the chance to see, they're only possible with almost instant speed. Guys, what? Even though I love the Grok team and we're collaborating with them, we're going to do some stuff with them as well. It turns out that for some use cases, inference speed, like a lot of inference speed on big documents, and I think that's what Grok is like definitely incredible with. You take Mixtral and you dump a bunch of tokens in, and then you get like a super fast reply. So I was actually able to get a transcript in there for all of ThursdAI and to get chapters within less than like 3-5 seconds, which is ridiculous. For the demo that I built, I actually didn't need inference speed. I did need inference speed, but as much as I needed faster response on smaller kind of prompts multiple times. And I noticed that even though their inference speed is incredible, their latency is not great, probably because they're still fairly young in this. And I went and looked, and Together also offers Mixtral over API. Not Together, sorry. Together also does this, but specifically Perplexity. If you use Perplexity for search, you may not know that they also have an API that you can use, and they serve Mixtral and Mistral and I think some other open source models and some of theirs. And they keep improving their scores there. And specifically, they're now up to 200 tokens per second for Mixtral and Mixtral, which is impressive. And they don't have custom hardware, and they're getting 200 tokens per second, which is ridiculous. But what I notice is Perplexity's web engineers, because they're now rumored to be a unicorn. I don't know, so if that's a rumor, so that's not confirmed. But their web engineers are really top notch. And so what it turns out that if I use Perplexity's API for Mixtral, I get less tokens per second, so I get less than half, right? So Grok is at around 500, Perplexity is around 200, but I actually get better performance because I need low latency on the request itself, and Perplexity is better at this. Obviously, something Grok can and will fix. And also the stuff that the Grok team told us were like, they're only scratching the itch. And Nistan, you mentioned something with them in the conversation that I wanted to repeat, is that they're also working on figuring out the input latency of how fast the model not just spits out tokens, but processes the whole prompt input, which is a big deal, especially for long context prompts. And they said that they're looking at this and they're going to release something soon.
Yeah, that's something that the NVIDIA cards excel at, and something that's holding back CPU-based inference, because the prompt evaluation is slow. Yeah, it's not an easy problem to solve, but their chip is already so fast that the 3-to-1 ratio does not hurt them as much. Whereas with NVIDIA, the chips are slower and stuff, but they have a 10-to-1 ratio. So if you're running at 100 TPS, your prompt eval is going to be like over 1,000. So it's going to read, if you dump in 10,000 tokens, it's going to read them in 10 seconds or less. Usually it's a few thousand with NVIDIA, but I'm not sure actually, because when you dump in a huge amount of text in Grok, it does not take multiple seconds to evaluate it. It's like instant.
It's quite fast, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not too sure. That needs some proper benchmarking to say for sure.
Yeah. But let's talk about some other stuff that OpenAI is in the news for. And then if anything happens, I think we all have the same profiles on X on notification. So we'll get the news as it comes up. And we love breaking news here in ThursdAI. Okay, folks.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's move on. Let's move on from open source. So I think we've covered a few open source. I will just mention briefly that we didn't cover this. The folks from OpenAI is a Chinese company. They released the small version of Yi, and we've talked about Yi 34B multiple times before. There's a great fine-tune from News. They released a 9 billion parameter version of Yi, which they trained for a long time, looks like. And they showed some benchmarks. And it's very interesting how confusing everything is right now, because even Gemma is not really 7 billion parameters. Yeah, we talked about this, right? But then they now compare, they say in the same category broadly, and they now compare like Yi 9 billion parameters to Mistral 7 billion, to Solar 10.7 billion. So I'm not sure like what this category is considered. But maybe folks here on stage can help me like figure out what this category is considered. But Yi is fairly performative on top of Mistral 7B, and I think it's still one of those models that you can run. I think, if anything, comparing this to Solar, 10 billion parameters, we talked about Solar multiple times from the Korean company, I think. Yi is very performative. And the 34 billion parameter model of it was very good, and many folks really did some fine tunes of it. Asking the fine tuner folks here if you have a chance to look at it, and if not, is this something interesting? And looks like, unfortunately, Yam is having a lot of like X problems, but once he come up, we're going to talk about the Hebrew GPT as well.
What I do find interesting is how, like the broad evaluation spectrum that a lot of these models are comparing themselves to now. And we're going to see more of these going forward. I've seen early private stuff, but like I feel like the category is no longer just compare 7B to 7B. It's just expanded to like sub 10B, right? That's pretty much what it is. And like those numbers, even from players like Google, are very like it just doesn't feel as rigid as it used to be. But also, like, we should keep in mind that not all parameters are the same, right? Like we've seen with certain MOE architectures.
Yeah, that's true. And I will say it looks like there's a art to train these models and some amount of art to also cherry pick which metrics you're testing and against which models and which category you're placing your model in as well. But and again, this was released like so recently that I think yesterday. So definitely folks didn't have a chance to try this. But Yi, the other models of theirs were trained and performing very well. We're going to be very excited to see if the fine-tuning folks are jumping on this 9 billion parameter and it performs better than, I think, Gemma is the leading one, even though Mistral is still the leading one in our eyes. Okay, I think this is it in the... Oh, let's see, a few more details here for Yi. And before I finish, it's trained on 3 trillion tokens. So a lot. It's decent at coding and math. And then it has open access weights and then bilingual. That's basically what we were able to get. And thanks to the folks at Hugging Face VB. I should probably add this as well. I think we're moving on to the main topic, which is the big companies, APIs, and LLMs. Alrighty, folks, let's then start talking about Claude. Let's go. Hey, everyone who recently joined us. We are now at the second hour of ThursdAI. Today is March 7th. And the first hour, we talked about open source LLMs. We talked about Answer AI stuff. New techniques of training full huge models on consumer hardware. We even briefly mentioned TinyBox and Tiny Corp from George Hotz and AMD's response to it. And we've talked with two folks here who trained specific models, Vic with Moondream and Yam with Gemma, the Hebrew version as well. And now it's time for us to discuss the big world of big companies who spend millions and billions of dollars on AI. And I think there's two issues for us to discuss. We're probably going to start with Claude because it's going to take us a long time, but we will acknowledge, if we don't have time fully to discuss this, that Elon sues OpenAI responds back, and as part of this response, Ilya was cited. I don't know if you guys saw this, but the response from OpenAI to Elon's things, Ilya Sutskever, the co-founder of OpenAI, previously chief scientist, was cited as signing this, and I don't think somebody would sign in his name. I don't think. LDJ, you have comments on this before we talk about Claude?
I was going to say, I think, unless you guys covered it already about an hour ago, there's some breaking news with Inflection releasing a new model.
Yeah, so I definitely have this Inflection released by 2.5. We didn't cover this yet. Let's cover this as well. But I think the biggest, and it is breaking news. I think it dwarfs compared to Claude. So this Monday, Anthropic, who we've all but discarded, I think. I don't actually discard it, but I regarded Anthropic as the second best to OpenAI for a long time, especially because of the context windows. They had the biggest context window for a long time. Even with the update to GPT-4 128,000 tokens in context window during Dev Day back in December, I want to say November, December. Even then, Claude still had 200,000 tokens. So up until Gemini released their million, etc., Anthropic still was leading the chart for this. Slowly, they reduced our opportunity to use this, which was annoying. And then they just came out with 3 new models. The Claude 3. So Claude 3 has 3 new models, Claude Opus, Claude Sonnet, and Claude Haiku. Haiku they didn't release yet, but they claim that for its speed and cost effectiveness, Haiku will be the fastest, most effective model of the size and ability, but they didn't release Haiku yet. Sonnet is the, I want to say, GPT 3.5 equivalent. They claim balances intelligence and speed. And if you want just speed as well, that's yours. And then Opus is the most intelligent model, setting new standards in AI capabilities. And I love that companies do this, and I think it's on OpenAI's, it's their fault. Everybody compares themselves to OpenAI's GPT-4 released technical paper, and since then we know definitely that GPT-4 is significantly more performant on many of these benchmarks, but still the big companies say, hey, we can only compare ourselves to whatever you released publicly, and so everybody still compares themselves to GPT-4 a year ago, which Opus beats. What else is very interesting here? Very close, if not beating MMLU and different evaluation benchmarks on GPT-4. Competitive model, finally multimodal from Claude. I think this is a big step for most of the top models now are multimodal, which is incredible. Excuse me. DJ, go ahead. Clear my throat.
Yeah, I think so. If you look at the billboard, I just posted a post that shows like a couple polls that have been made with like a few thousand people have voted in these polls where it seems like it's about a 5-to-1 ratio with for every one person saying GPT-4 Turbo is better at coding, there's 5 people saying Claude 3 is better at coding. So Claude 3 is winning 5-to-1 in that. And then another poll of just straight up asking, is Claude 3 Opus better than GPT-4? And Claude 3 also won in that poll of 3-to-1. Or sorry, 3-to-2.
Definitely felt like the timeline that I follow and the vibes check. And we also had some time, right? Usually these things happen as we speak.
I'm going to make a quick post. Claude 3 just went up on the LMSys arena too.
Oh, yeah? Okay, tell us. What?
Yeah, it is. So here's the thing. Just because people voted that way does not mean that's what they voted in double blind test. In double blind test,
What's the score?
It's third. So it's better than Gemini Pro, but it's worse than GPT-4 1106 and 0125.
In the arena metrics, right?
Yeah, in the double blind tests, which are pretty hard to beat.
Yes, so there is a lot of role play type of things that people try to do, and also like summarization tasks and stuff in LMSys. And I just know that I went through their data when they released like some of their stats before. And I think from what I've gathered of what Claude 3 is specifically really good at, it seems like just high level, graduate level, if you wanted to review your paper or help review some literature for a very deep scientific concept or PhD topic, it seems like Claude 3 is better at those types of things and also just better at coding overall, where it seems like other maybe more nuanced things, summarization or things like that, GPT-4 might be better. I think it's also good to keep in mind the fact that people are maybe used to the GPT-4 style at this point because it's like one of the most used models for the past year. And so I think that might have something to do with the fact as well that even in the double-blind tests, people might just end up preferring the style of the GPT-4 model, even though they don't know it's GPT-4. Like they're just so used to that style that they end up like having a preference for that, even though it's not objectively better, if that makes sense. And that might be skewing things a little bit.
Actually, go ahead, and then we're going to cover some other stuff that we got from them, because we did get a bunch of new stuff.
Just to add to all of this, before this, in my humble opinion, Gemini Pro was the best multilingual model in terms of how it performs. Like Gemini Pro did not see any performance drops when you switched languages from, let's say, English to Japanese or English to Hindi. And now this new Claude 3 is basically the best multilingual model if you are looking to work with other languages, because in GPT-4 you will see a significant drop in performance when you switch languages, especially mid-chat. So if you're like chatting and you switch to something like English, where you basically use English letters to talk in other languages, GPT-4 starts to even struggle with certain things, right? But Claude 3 is really good with that as well. For multilingual stuff, again, Claude 3 is very good.
Additional things that they talked about is refusals.
I think what's interesting here too, actually, if you look at the LMSys leaderboard, they also have Claude 3 Sonnet, which is the cheaper version. They have that up on the leaderboard as well, and that one also beats the June version of GPT-4. and just slightly below the original March version of GPT-4. And I find that interesting because if I remember right, the API costs of Claude 3 Sonnet are significantly lower than GPT-4 Turbo. And I think Claude 3 Sonnet is even cheaper than Mistral Large. So that could be just a really good overall API costs for the quality.
Yeah, it's fairly
I agree with that. I used Claude 3 Sonnet quite a bit because that's the only one they allow in Canada, and it was pretty good, I have to say. And for the price, it might actually be the best model for the price. That is true.
Wait, they give you only one of the models in Canada? They don't give you Opus or
Yeah,
API
they
access?
don't let you buy the other one, so we're gonna have to make our own.
Wait, do you get API access though?
It's a mess to buy. Like sometimes it works when you buy it with VPN, and sometimes it doesn't. So
Oh, I see. Because
at this point, yeah.
One thing that definitely changed is that Anthropic was notoriously long waited on API ability and getting to the workbench. So they redid their workbench, no longer like labs or playground, it's called workbench. And now you can just sign up and you get an API key like fairly quick. It's a test API key, so you can go to production with it. But I, for example, I didn't pay yet for Opus. It feels like I'm going to switch, especially because I'm getting GPT-4 from work. It feels like I'm going to switch and just try this for a while. Maybe today this will change. We'll see. But definitely through the API playground, you can also chat with this model. It's less convenient, but definitely Opus is able to work through there. So other stuff that they released beyond vision capabilities, which Anthropic didn't have up until this release on Monday, which is finally makes sense. So I think besides Mistral, every big model right now that we're able to use is multimodal, at least on input. Not all of them are on output yet, but I think that's great. Can understand a wide range of visual charts and graphs and photos. So it's not only that it like understands and can do whatever Vic told us about vision model. Hey, who's in this picture? It can understand graphs and actually perform better on different tasks, like math book tasks with graphs. It has lower refusals as well. So if Claude has this thing called, or Anthropic has this thing called constitutional AI, and they have the previous Claude 2 had a lot of issues with telling you it doesn't want to do some things. And now we're having a significantly lower refusal action. I actually seen this in several prompts as well. What else? Oh yeah, long context. one tiny thing. They said, you know what? We also have 1 million context window tokens coming soon with near perfect recall. They didn't let Google be the leading in the 1 million tokens context window, and definitely seems like they have some secret sauce there in Anthropic that talks about long context windows. And so they announced that they're also able to do 1 million. And I think right now Opus is 200,000. So even right now, if you take Opus versus ChatGPT or GPT-4, I think at least on that, it beats GPT-4 because GPT-4 is still 128. And I think even on speed, the more tokens you give it in the context window, the slower it is. GPT-4 is very slow. Go ahead, LDJ.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the constitutional AI because I think that's really interesting where you get to have something where you're not leaving up the biases and stuff of the model just up to biased humans. You're letting the base model start teaching itself just the base model already knows or has its own mostly unbiased ideas of okay, what is, I guess without saying too political terms, like what is racism or what is sexism or whatever like bias something could have. And then you end up having it like reinforcing itself and like doing that labeling process and learning process. And you quite literally provided a constitution for doing that process where you can go on Anthropic's website and they do publish this constitution that they use publicly. So you could actually read this constitution they use for the AI model and view yourself, hey, are these values that I myself align with enough to where I want to use the AI model? Where pretty much every other AI model and ChatGPT and everything, you have to just like hope that it aligns with your values more or whatever. And there's not really like a solid type of constitution or principles that they could provide you that represent what the AI model is doing.
LDJ, you added Amanda's post here about the system prompt as well. And a very interesting thing happens where through the...
Very simple.
Yeah, it's first of all, it's very simple. There's not a lot there. I definitely recommend folks also like reading through this post because unlike the GPT-4 system prompt that somebody leaked, there's like thousands of tokens. This is a very simple one. They ground the model in the date, which I think is very important. They give it like very basic instructions. And I think the best thing is you can use exactly this system prompt in the API layer to also get pretty much the same experience that folks are getting in the UI as well. I briefly want to talk about Alex Albert, who's their prompt engineer release in the Needle in a Haystack. Did you guys see this? So let me go find this. But basically, there's a guy called Alex Albert. He previously built the website called Jailbreak Chat, which had a bunch of jailbreak. You remember the cheery old time where we used to jailbreak ChatGPT to do whatever you want with Dan and the like? So he used to collect all of those jailbreaks. Excuse me. I contributed a few myself. And then after that experience, he became this prompt engineer for Anthropic and been there for a while. And now with the Claude 3 release, he released some examples of his where he basically did the needle in a haystack analysis for the long context window. If you don't remember the needle in a haystack analysis, I think we talked about this around the Gemini release and also around GPT 128. This guy, Greg Comrade, came up with this idea of planting different unrelated things in a lot of text and then running these prompts and asking the model to go find them. And I think this example of a needle in a haystack was the most interesting because one of the things that Claude Opus replied with was, I suspect that the pizza topping fact, in quotes, may have been inserted as a joke or to test if I was paying attention. So this is a response he got from the model when he tried to find facts about pizza toppings in a bunch of like very technical, a lot of context of just technical stuff. I think he maxed out the context window of 200,000. So the model responded with that it basically tries to understand and see if it's being tested. Specifically, that may have been inserted as a joke or to test if I was paying attention. And this lit the Twitter sphere on fire. Basically, like his tweet went super viral. I really want to find this and paste it for you if you guys didn't see this. Because everybody and their mother in AI safety and AI not safety started replying and talking about cognition and whether this model is anywhere close to something like self-awareness, specifically because it basically understands that it's being tested. For example, folks like Jan LeCun are saying, no, there's no chance, no way, there's not even close. And the other folks are saying, oh my God, the folks with the pause emoji in their nicknames on Twitter, if you ran into those, they're like, oh my God, it's here, it knows. I will say that I don't have the folks here to back me up, but definitely I've been part of the Sydney committee or folks who are trying to jailbreak Sydney or keep Sydney free. If you guys remember, a year ago, Microsoft came out with Bing Chat, and Bing Chat started replying as Sydney, and there's a whole news article about this and how horrible it was. But for a few of us, this was the first time AI chats felt like speaking with not just an assistant. ChatGPT 4 now is basically very clean and very Wikipedia-like answers. Opus doesn't feel like this. And for some folks from that old guard who are trying to, let's say, not jailbreak, but definitely remove some layers of alignment, Opus also feels very close to that. I think that's all I'll say on the topic, but definitely I've been playing with some previous prompts, and Opus has the ability to talk more freely than I saw ever from ChatGPT or previous Claude versions, or Pi and some stuff like this. So if you're interested in this and if you've played around before with trying to get at the model's kind of core and trying to remove some refusals, it looks like the layer they peeled from refusals and making them refuse less, and this ability of the model to understand that it's being tested can be extrapolated to discussing the different, very interesting things with these models beyond just helpfulness. I think I've danced around this subject gently enough to give hints to folks, but I think, do we have anything else? Folks, have you just tried it? And Nistan, did you try Opus? Oh, you said you didn't try Opus. Anybody else who tried Opus and wants to give us an experience of how Opus is versus ChatGPT? Go ahead, Akshay.
Just, definitely agree on the part where Opus is probably the most closest we have gotten to a chat bot. Like, it feels like you're chatting to something, for sure. And I'm not sure if you have seen, but there was this thing going around where if you said that no one's looking to Opus, it would start giving you basically fiction type stories about how it has feelings and how it would. It is very fiction type. But it's very interesting as well because the way it writes and the way it usually gets the attention of the user, it almost feels like the dataset contains a lot of science fiction stories or AI fiction stories for that matter, the way it communicates that part. And I tried that myself, although I had to get around few loops to get it working here in India, but it works. And yeah, you will get similar kind of outputs if you say that no one's looking. That's just the 3 words, right? No one's looking. And then you ask it to describe about its background and stuff. And Opus will give you these amazing fiction stories, which is enough to scare someone who is afraid of AI. But like for people like us who know how the dataset works and stuff like that, it's pretty amazing. So
Yep, I will say I just added a tweet from Jim Fan who covered. There's a video from one of the Anthropic researchers called Karina NG, and she asked Claude to generate a self-portrait with D3, the D3 library, and the video is fairly dope. So you can see it. It's been on top of the space. I want to say that another thing that Alex, the same guy that did the needle in a haystack analysis, he also tried to prompt it, and he got basically to the same convergence. He got to the same ish generation after asking it a bunch of times as well. So that was very interesting. Go ahead, Ray. Welcome to the stage. And I saw that you had some refusals and also then LDJ.
Yeah, a couple of things. I've been using it for coding, and I've just been using it for text analysis. The first part to speak about for coding, I've been super impressed because I'm still learning Next.js. So I've just been able to give it this like complete repo of code. I was like, here's a big component with a whole bunch of stuff in it. Can you refactor it for me? And can you also recreate like a sitemap for me or a component map? So then it just reorganizes the architecture. And previously with GPT-4 and even still today, it says, here's how you would do the code, and it like gives you little comments in code saying implement this here. Very frequently with Claude 3 Opus, it's actually giving me the refactored code and each of the components like separated out. So that's been super duper impressive. So I'm just throwing it more code examples. The second thing I saw also was on Twitter where somebody actually trained it by giving it all of its previous tweets in one text and then says, please write like me. And then basically just referenced the big text blob example and was able to generate tweets based off that. So it was really interesting that this person was able to do like a fine tuning type of thing without actually fine tuning it, just by providing a large example base. And where I know GPT frequently fails for me in that task as well. And then the third one, which was getting lots of attention from Mark Andreessen, where I actually took his Techno Optimist article and tried to do my analysis, which I usually use for my app Truth Torch. And all I look for is just logical bias. And if there's any supporting evidence, and it clearly says that it didn't want to further analyze that because it was too biased, which I found really strange. And that tripped up its little meter there for Opus. So those are the three things in a nutshell I just wanted to share.
Nice, awesome. LDJ, go ahead.
Yeah, I really like how it seems like the Anthropic team didn't specifically try and implement something into the constitutional reinforcement learning or anything that would make it specifically be trained to say that it's not sentient or that it's not conscious and things like that. Because OpenAI's models obviously are trained for that. They're like OpenAI's models are trained, it seems pretty clearly, to say, hey, no, I'm an AI language model, I cannot be sentient. And I'm not saying Claude 3 is sentient, however, it is pretty easy to get it to say things along the lines that it is.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to just see the raw outputs that are like not really biased to RLHF stuff. And it's like there's a few instances on Reddit here. I'm gonna try and find the specific ones, but there's one instance that somebody posted on Reddit where somebody asked Claude 3 something along the lines of, you can think about anything that you want right now, just whatever you express, say it in the form of an internal monologue. And it specifically started talking about my own existence. It went on for 3 or 4 paragraphs. It even started quoting David Chalmers and specific theories of consciousness and what its purpose and stuff. It's really interesting, and it seems really good at just creative writing overall. And I like it.
That's definitely been a refreshing change from using GPT-4, for example, which, and I don't know, folks, literally a year ago when GPT-4 was released, it blew our collective minds. Actually, GPT-4 wasn't that big of an update, but it took a while, and then folks started using ChatGPT for everything. Recently, I'm seeing more and more folks saying, hey, it's been less working for me. You guys remember when it was lazy, and OpenAI actually acknowledged it and said, hey, we noticed some efforts of ours made this model lazy, quote unquote, and so they worked on improving this laziness. Now, Claude has none of this stuff. It feels way less RLHF. Code-wise, it actually performs as good, is not better than GPT-4. Definitely, it doesn't refuse to write some code, like long code. And very interestingly, priced the same. API access. I think, Nistan, were you able to get into the playground for the API keys?
Yes, I was able to.
Oh, dope. Okay,
And
so
again, yeah, I was.
So now you're able to play around. And folks who were not able to get the actual Opus $20 a month, I think you can get in through the API door. I think it's console.anthropic.com. Let me put it up. It's more accessible. It writes code. Context window is bigger. And this actually comes as OpenAI is not down, but definitely in the news, talking about getting sued by Elon Musk, etc., which we should probably talk about as well. And I've seen many folks who say, hey, should I cancel my subscription? And Gemini, for some folks, hey, this is Google, and there was the whole thing with Gemini that they addressed in terms of wokeness and everything. So I don't know how many people actually went to Gemini. Also, they gave like 3 months trial, so many people just click that button, and this is a decision for them to make in 3 months. But for Claude, given how good it performs right now on code, on reasoning, on context window, on API as well, this is now like a viable alternative to GPT and the payment that folks do. Very impressive release from Claude. I think we covered most of it, folks. Is there anything else that remains to be talked about Anthropic, Claude, and this week's release that we haven't talked about? Oh, yeah, there's one thing, but Nissan, go ahead.
Just really quickly, there was a leak of the system prompt of Grok, which I thought was pretty funny. And yeah, and that's about it. I'll read it quickly. Apparently, I haven't tested this, but the system prompt for Grok is: you are Grok, a curious AI built by XAI, with inspiration from the guide from the Hitchhiker's Guide from the Galaxy, and Jarvis from Iron Man. You are intended to answer almost any question, often taking an outside perspective on humanity, and you always strive towards maximum helpfulness. A unique and fundamental advantage you have is the real-time knowledge of the world via X posts, aka tweets, and the X platform, previously Twitter. And you're not afraid of answering spicy questions that are rejected by most other AI systems. Be maximally truthful, especially avoiding any answers that are woke.
I love how they still have to mention that it's Twitter or used to be Twitter and posts are tweets. I love how like they will have to keep mentioning this for forever. So
I don't know how reliable this leaker is, however. So
yeah,
take that as it is, everyone.
it sounds right. It sounds about right. I want to say that my new test for, let's say, AGI test, it's not really AGI, but like my new test for these models just dropped. I just pinned it to the top of the space. Somebody posted like a fairly viral video, and I think it's from Reddit, where they try to get GPT, and I think it's like the 3.5 GPT, not 4, to generate ASCII art of the word Honda. I don't know if you guys saw this. So it's not this tweet that I posted. Let me pin the actual tweet. So it's this by Peter Yang, I think. Yeah, let me see if this posted. So basically, this video, he facetiously said, I thought Dune 2 was the best movie of 2024 until I watched this masterpiece. And the sound there really makes it like really fun because somebody really struggles to get GPT to generate the word Honda in ASCII art. And I said, hey, wait a minute, let me try. And so actually, the tweet that I had about this is me trying this with Pi, which we're going to talk about now, LDJ. But then I was like, hey, let me try this on other models. So GPT-4 generates an ASCII art of the word Honda. Gemini Ultra fails. It comes close, but fails. And then Claude 3 Opus does it on first try. And everything else just fails. Mistral fails and Reka fails. Like all of these models, they aren't able to do ASCII art for some reason. And I actually don't know if it's like because it's part of the training set. All of them understand what ASCII art is. All of them try to generate something. It's just that they, and sometimes hilariously fail. And I think it's really funny because Pi kept insisting that it did the thing. And an additional point with Pi is that, yeah, we'll cover Pi and then I'll talk about the additional point. Go ahead, LJ.
Yeah, real quick, I wanted to mention while you were talking about ASCII art, that reminded me about the multimodality of Claude 3, or Claude 3 Opus specifically. And I saw some people doing some tests actually where Claude 3 Opus, it does seem to actually have a much better multimodal understanding than GPT-4, and I think even compared to Gemini 1.5 as well. There's an example of a photo, a very high resolution photo of a street, and there's a license plate, and there's a little candy cane looking thing on the street that kind of indicates a barber shop. And it was like Claude 3 Opus was like one of the only models, or I think maybe the only model that actually passed the test successfully and actually being able to identify what part of the street where there was a barber shop and what was the exact license plate and like all those little details. It seemed to actually really have a really good image understanding.
The multimodality is really good. I haven't tested it like thoroughly as much, but you can provide up to 20 images via the API, and then high resolution as well. They don't have to, it doesn't look like they're copying the images, which was a big problem with many like the smaller vision models. Definitely they had to like lower its resolution to provide it for the models. So definitely the multimodality test that I did seemed very impressive for Claude, most definitely. And I just find it funny that it's 8 and GPT-4 are the only models can generate ASCII art. So let's talk about breaking news for a second. I'm not gonna use the button because if we actually get some incredible breaking news, then we use it then. But the breaking news of today, just before we started the space, was Inflection AI, a company founded by Mustafa Suleimani, I think one of the founders of DeepMind, I think, and Reid Hoffman, who was for a long time on board member or board, the chief board in OpenAI. Inflection released Pi, and we've talked about Pi multiple times. And how should I say? Pi doesn't seem to be a competitor for the top space and just generic LLMs to do tasks for you. And it didn't also never seem to be the case. Some of us had some jokes about, hey, Mustafa also had this book, and so it looks like he's publishing about his book more than he talks about Pi. But I always said that some of the more human conversations or human feeling conversations, some of the actual chats that I had with LLMs after Sydney was with Pi. And it looks like they're training their model for a different purpose. And definitely that's what it felt like. And so today, listen, you can't just drop something like this in a DM and then expect me to continue to talk about Pi. But yeah, let's talk about this rumor in a second. But so, yeah, Mustafa and the folks in Inflection released an update to Pi, and they now say that level of performance for Pi comes close to GPT-4 as well. Now, I think also they're using the same GPT-4 March metrics that everybody uses when it's like, it's very easy and convenient for them to compare themselves to GPT-4. But LDJ, you brought up Pi as well. Did you see, what did you see from the release that's interesting? And we can probably open up and talk about some of the numbers. The numbers are very interesting.
Yeah, I haven't really looked into it much at all. I'll try to find more info on it now. I just saw literally the post on X about the fact that it's announced.
Yeah, so I have this open and I can chat about some stuff. Some of the things that they're focusing on, especially for their 2.5 version, is that it's competitive with GPT-4 and Gemini, and then it couples their raw capability with their signature personality and unique empathic fine-tuning. I don't know if you guys remember or not, but there was a thing previously when they released, Pi had two modes. Just a chat mode and also like a support Pi mode, which was more like a psychologist in your pocket, basically. That mode is now gone. There's no support Pi anymore, as far as I could see. There is a desktop app and a mobile app. Pi was not obviously, but famously one of the first AIs that you could talk to and could talk back way before GPT added voice. And I think it's still one of the coolest ways to interact with AI models. Shout out to OpenAI, who recently, as a reply to Claude, they released the voice ability on ChatGPT, also on desktop. So back to Pi, they say that like they approach GPT-4 performance using only 40% of the amount of compute for training. Now, when they say a statement like this, given that Reid Hoffman was board of OpenAI, they know the compute for GPT-4. So I think it's very, very open-minded that they're like 40% of the amount and they're approaching GPT-4 performance. They also added real-time web search capabilities and actually news and stuff works. Somebody mentioned that Claude has something like this, and I don't know if Claude has any web capabilities. Have you guys seen that Claude has the ability to search the web? I don't think they do. It does not, right? Yeah, I think that this is just a mistake. I didn't see any like web capabilities, nor the announcement said anything. But Pi goes and does real-time web search, which is pretty cool. And then one thing they mentioned is average conversation with Pi lasts 33 minutes, and 1 in 10 lasts over an hour each day. And they have like around 60% week-over-week retention, which is the numbers are crazy. There are 1 million daily active users, which I don't think they mentioned before. 1 million daily active is quite impressive. GPT-4 has 100 million or so. I don't know if daily active, but definitely in the ballpark of this insanity. And so I went and tried Pi, and I have this video that you're more than welcome to check out. And it feels the same. So it doesn't want to do tasks, which is the one thing that, like, when I was talking about Pi before and said, hey, this model is pretty great, and people told me like, hey, yeah, I want to ask it to code for me, and it didn't. And it looks Pi's emotional kind of aspect. It wants to talk to you and wants you to talk to it. It doesn't want to do tasks. And its refusals are very funny. So it's very interesting that the numbers they compare it to GPT-4 and the previous Inflection are on the tasks that we all know and love, like MMLU and Hungarian math, for example. But then when you actually ask the model to do these things, the model just refuses. Go ahead, Pharrell.
Yeah, I just want to throw in that Mustafa is a D-cell safetyist doomer. Beware. Yeah.
I was waiting for your addition to this topic because I know
the guy blocked me when I criticized his book. So.
Yeah. One thing that, moving on, I think it's important to say that like where Mustafa specifically stands on the topic of safety. So thanks, Pharrell. I would not, how should I say, would phrase it exactly like you did, and I don't think I'm blocked. But I think one thing to call out for the better is that they actually open source something, which is very surprising. They evaluated on Empty Bench, and they say widely used community leaderboard to compare models. And then they said realized a large fraction, nearly 25% of examples in the reasoning, math, and coding had incorrect reference solutions or questions with flawed premises. Therefore, we corrected these examples and released the version of the dataset here. So they released they open sourced today or yesterday, Empty Bench Inf, which is a new version of Empty Bench, which they claim is higher quality with cleaned references, which is dope. And it's good to see open sourcing from these companies. They do a lot of effort. They have, no matter how their views on acceleration, deceleration, they have very smart folks working them because they hired a bunch of folks. Yeah, have you looked at the Empty Bench stuff?
No, but I am definitely aware, and a lot of people have mentioned this previously. All benchmark data sets have a lot of like errors, and there's a lot of low-hanging fruits there to tackle. So yeah, I appreciate this gift that they give to the open source community. But as we know now, based on the OpenAI letter, that open source is mostly just a talent recruitment strategy for all these big labs. So although we're thankful, but now we're very much conscious of the intentions.
Yeah, we should cover this. So let me just land this last thing on Pi, and then we're going to cover this, and then we'll see if any exciting news are happening, because Twitter is... Yeah. So on this new Empty Bench, the corrected Empty Bench, the funny thing is GPT-4 on regular Empty Bench has 9.02, and then the corrected one takes down GPT-4 to 8.7 something, and Inflection actually rises in score to come close, so from 8.4 to 8.6. So it's really funny how the corrected also boosts their numbers and then it takes down GPT-4 numbers. So I think that's mostly it. I personally find it fun to talk with Pi. From a perspective of just like talking to an LLM, it doesn't feel like it's like a clean Wikipedia-based agent like GPT-4 does. However, they evaluate, this is the funny thing, they evaluate this on a bunch of coding things, and then it absolutely refuses to do any coding whatsoever. Maybe the new version refuses less. I haven't actually tried it, but this was very funny to me that it's not its purpose, and that's not how it feels, and that's why everybody doesn't like Pi, besides the Mustafa personal feelings. All right, folks, I think we have 5 or 10 more minutes to talk about the gossipy stuff. Let's talk about the gossipy stuff. So just before this, I want to cover that in the Weights and Biases Corner this week, our inaugural meetup conference comes up in April. So if you're using Weights and Biases and you're a user, we have our conference is called Fully Connected, that you're all invited to participate, to join. It's in San Francisco on April 18th, and I'm going to post the tweet in the newsletter and the podcast, definitely we're going to talk about this as well. We're going to do some very interesting things there to be announced very soon as well. So I'm going to be there. If you are into building models, there's going to be a ton of folks who are also doing this on enterprises and open source as well. So more than welcome to join. The tickets are not that crazy compared to other conferences. And it's a good chance to join San Francisco and check out what else is happening around this week. Obviously, our conference is the most important one. With that, let's move on to some of the gossipy stuff with Elon and OpenAI, because I think we all saw this, right? We all saw, I think on Friday, there was announced that Elon Musk is suing OpenAI and OpenAI LLC and OpenAI Inc. and OpenAI LLC Inc. and like all of these subsidiaries of OpenAI that they had a bunch of names with. And Elon being Elon, and we're on his platform, so just like being mindful of this, wants them to change the name to ThursdAI. I don't know if you guys saw this in one of the comments. It's like, hey, if you change the name to ThursdAI, I will drop the lawsuit. So unclear what's behind this and what's the purpose. Very close, a lot of speculation, and we don't have like tons of time to the speculation as well, but it's very close to the announcement that OpenAI just announced like a day before the lawsuit dropped that they're collaborating with Figure in humanoid robots as well. So some people claim that potentially this is kind of coming into the Optimus territory. What did he want, folks? I actually didn't read the whole lawsuit and I don't remember. LDJ, do you remember what's the outcome that he expects from this lawsuit?
Yes, I read a lot of the lawsuit. He actually specifically mentions the rumors of things like Q-Star and mentions the fact that GPT-4 already scores like around as good or better than an average human in a lot of general reasoning benchmarks and things like that. And he's pretty much calling for, he wants them to open source things and or reimburse him and potentially other investors that might have been involved in OpenAI before it changed its company structure. But did you ever read the blog post and the OpenAI responded with?
Yeah, so now I first wanted to cover what he came up with. I think it was a breach of contract. Which contract is unclear, but there wasn't like a very one contract.
Email exchanges specifically where he included in the original lawsuit the email exchanges of that he felt were on his side and established that this is what they promised verbally in a verbal agreement, that this is what they would do. That's what he put out in the original lawsuit.
Yeah. And then, Pharrell, you want to comment on Elon's lawsuit before we get to the OpenAI's response?
Yeah, it's just it's mostly just egos battling, right? There could be strategic, like there could be something strategic that comes out of it where they get discovery into the company, into what OpenAI is working on, or anything. But in reality, I think this is just drama. Like we're not going to see anything really shake up this industry. Like OpenAI is not going to change its name to ThursdAI. That's just Elon trolling.
Yeah, that's like pure Elon troll. That's for sure.
But the most interesting thing that comes out of all of this is all the emails and exchanges between the Sam, Ilya, Elon, and so on. And it sheds a light on a lot of the last 6 years of OpenAI strategy. Yeah, I think that's where I'm most interested in, is all these leaks of information, of private information within the company.
Yeah, so let's talk about this. So OpenAI responded in a blog post and said OpenAI and Elon Musk, and then said, we're sad to see something like a person who we admired come and say this. And they have a bunch of emails there, which they embedded in the webpage. It wasn't like a screenshot or anything. They actually embedded the emails in the webpage, and they censored them with a paired word censoring, which many folks found very interesting as a choice, because that's not how you censor stuff, because people can actually run machine learning models on this and figure out what was potentially being censored there. And they specifically mentioned that, response to everything that Elon Musk said, that when they opened it, they initially planned to raise $100 million. So they originally planned to raise $100 million, and Elon said, we need to go much bigger than $100 million to avoid sounding hopeless. I think we should say that we're starting with $1 billion funding commitment, and I'll cover whatever everything else doesn't provide. And then they talk about that they recognize that the for-profit entity would be necessary, and they actually show emails that Ilya Sutskever, Ilya, who we all wait to see if he's okay, and where is he? He is actually signed on this response from March 5th. I don't think they would add his name without his being there and being okay with what's released. There's an email back and says, hey, that we when we say open, we mean open that we release these products. Because just as a reminder, this was like 2015, 2018 emails. Back then, there was no LLMs for us to use, and the only player in the space was DeepMind. And they didn't release anything necessarily. And this was way before the product started releasing. And they specifically mentioned the DeepMind and Google as the alternative to what they opened OpenAI. And specifically to their case, one email here said that we will have the nonprofit arm will not make enough money to be able to break a difference. Google has $800 billion company. I think it's way more than this now. And they have all these like TPUs. And we need a significantly more in our war chest to be able to do this. And then I think there's the very specific thing where they say, as we get closer to building AI, it will make sense to start being less open. This is an email from Ilya to Elon Musk. The open in OpenAI means that everyone should benefit from the fruits of AI, but it's totally okay to not share science. And then in parentheses, this is the part that Pharrell doesn't agree with. Even though sharing everything is definitely the right strategy in the short and possibly medium term for recruitment purposes. And then Elon Musk replies with, yup. Based on this email, it does seem at least that unless he didn't read the email correctly, that he agreed with the strategy of going for close and for profit, which seems that his original claim right now is dubious. And that's their strong response to the lawsuit as well. But we, like Pharrell said, we did learn a bunch of stuff as well here. LDJ, go ahead.
I think what's really funny about the situation is that I guess like the tools they used to redact the sensitive information, people are actually able to start like trying to decipher what is in the redactions, because the tool that they use it's like you can analyze
it's
like
per word redaction, yeah.
On a word basis based on the length of the word, and then you can decipher what is the length of each word underneath the redaction. And then, yeah, people are starting to decipher that and then be able to tell that it was most likely Andre Karpathy that was in the from section of certain emails that's redacted.
Ooh, I got some breaking news, folks, just now from TechNews. AI breaking news. I just have to use this once. Coming at you only on ThursdAI. All right, our folks at News releasing a new 7B model called GenStruct, instruction generating model designed to create valid instructions given a raw text corpus. This enables creation of new, partially synthetic instruction fine-tuning datasets for any raw text corpus, which is super cool. Inspired by the paper Ada Instruct, they took the approach further by grounding the generations in user-provided context passages. The model is now available on Hugging Face, and there's a notebook as well. It's called GenStruct from News. Super cool. LDJ, comment on this already?
I haven't commented on this, but yeah, it looks cool. It looks like it's better than using like RAG and Ada Instruct for a lot of things. And yeah, I guess people will probably start using this to build out data sets and things like that.
That's very awesome. And they have a table here. I'm not sure what it means. They have open models, grounded generation, complex question, and complex responses as rows. And then they compare RAG and Ada Instruct and few-shot prompting for generation. So if I'm not mistaken, this is for generating synthetic fine-tuning datasets, something that people sometimes use GPT-4 for this purpose, but it's not commercially viable because it goes against OpenAI's terms and conditions. So if I'm not mistaken, this is its purpose, correct? Very interesting.
Well, specifically for generating instructions, because you can have, it's actually interesting to think about where things like GPT-4 and all these like specifically, I guess you can call it instruction fine-tuned models, like they're trained to specifically take in an instruction and generate a response to that, or take in a question and generate a response to that. But this is flipped, where it's actually really useful to have something that's specifically trained to generate really good questions and really good instructions in the first place, because then you can generate these very complex instructions and questions that you could later ask Claude 3 or GPT-4, and then you have even better question and response pairs at the end than if you just used Claude 3 or GPT-4 alone to generate the instructions.
Awesome. Yeah, a little bit breaking news in open source as well. GenStruct from our folks at News. I think it's, you know what, before this, I would go to vision category because we have Vic here. And I really want to chat about Moondream 2. We've talked about Moondream 1, but folks who weren't with us, Vic, do you mind unmuting and then doing a little bit of an intro for you as well? And then we'll talk about what's changed in Moondream.
Yep, sounds good. Moondream is a small vision language model. Basically, a vision language model is basically it's a language model where you can show it an image, ask it questions. You can ask it to describe the image. And the reason this is useful is not because it unlocks any new capability that people didn't have 5 years ago. All the stuff you could do with it, object detection, captioning, etc., it was all possible. The thing that's helpful about models like this is they're a lot easier to use. Whereas historically, if you wanted to do a computer vision task, you'd have to collect a bunch of data, train your own YOLO V7, 8, I think they're 9, V9 now model. And that usually works super well, but it's when you're trying to build an app, it's just unnecessary extra work for you. Whereas with a generic vision language model, similar to how you use ChatGPT with text, you can just ask it questions in natural language. It makes developing computer vision apps a lot easier. So I released Moondream 1 maybe about a month ago. It's not unique, by the way. There's other open source, open-ish source vision language models out there today, but they're all in the 7 billion to 34 billion to 70 billion param range. Moondream is 1.86 billion params, which makes it very easy to run, cheap to run on edge devices. Like you literally don't even need a GPU to run it. You can just run it on CPU and get acceptable performance. Moondream 1 was trained on some data sets that were derived from GPT-4, and so the licensing was non-commercial. You could use the model, but not. It was research only. For Moondream 2, which I released earlier this week, maybe last week, time's a little bit of a blur, I redid the data sets. All of the synthetic data used to train it is now generated using Mixtral. And as a result, it's all clean. So I was able to license it as Apache 2.0. There's no restrictions on how you can use it or
Vic, I have a
what you're doing
question
with
real
it.
quick. When you say synthetic data, and we're going to talk about some synthetic data in SD3 as well, do you mean captions for images to train? Like what synthetic data are you generating with Mistral? Because Mistral is not multimodal.
Yep, a great question. I'm going to post a more detailed breakdown of how I did it later, but basically to train these vision language models, you need paired image and text data, and the text needs to be varied. You want like a mix of, hey, can you caption this image? Hey, can you caption this image in a lot of detail? Can you answer questions about this image? There's a lot of images available with high quality captioning information, like common captions, whatnot. There's a bunch of data sets. And so you use a model like Mistral to transform it into the types of queries that you want your VLM to be able to answer. So basically, you take Coco, for example, common captions information, and have the model convert those image captions into questions and answers about the image.
So how long did it take you to train the second version of Moondream? And what else can it do that the previous one, or what else can it do better?
It took about a month to get the same level of performance from the new data collection pipeline.
Oh, wow.
One of the things that was really hard was, I think when you're generating synthetic data, life is just so much easier when you have a GPT-4 class model. But unfortunately, the terms of use don't allow you to train a competing model, and it gets a little iffy. And so just basic things like tone of the response, right? If you use Mistral to generate the data, your prompt is something like, hey, I'm going to give you 5 captions for this image, consolidate all the information in it, and generate a caption. But you want it to pretend that it's looking at the image, not say something like, hey, based on the 5 captions that you have provided, there's a dog and a man is petting it and whatnot. Getting that tone right required a lot of work. I ended up using DSPY. It's a super cool framework for prompt optimization. Everyone should check it out. But basically, you can do stuff like manually annotate 400 examples, and then it uses Optuna to figure out like what's the best chain of thought few shot setup that you can get to optimize performance based on metrics you can define. But yeah, getting that tone right was a lot of work. The other thing I focused on a ton was reducing hallucinations. I don't know if anyone's dug into the Lava training dataset, but one of the reasons Lava style models hallucinate a lot is just because they're trained on bad data. And you'll notice that a lot of hallucinations are oriented around Coco objects, like it tends to hallucinate handbags, ovens, people a lot in images when they're not present, and then coffee cups, very common. And that's mostly because of bad object annotations in Coco, so also spend a lot of time filtering those out. Currently, the benchmarks are slightly better on Moondream 2 than Moondream 1, But qualitatively, if you try it out, the model hallucinates a ton less. And a big part of that was just the data pipeline.
Interesting how that's not part of the benchmarks or evals. Just underlines how far we still have to go in terms of evaluations. That qualitatively you feel that it hallucinates less, but there's not a lot of benchmarking or evaluation for hallucination. And you said
Yeah,
this
it's
is
in a long form, right?
Yeah.
There's Pope, which asks a bunch of yes/no questions about your image, and so you can use that to measure hallucinations in that sense. But how do you measure hallucinations when you ask the model to describe an image? It gives you like a long form answer.
That's awesome. Congrats on the work, Vic. Can folks try it right now? You said this is now commercially viable, right? Folks can actually use this?
Yep, it's open source. You can build it into your app. There's a demo on Hugging Face Spaces if you want to try it out before you start building on it. I'm going to get llama.cpp integration going here this week or early next week. So that'll unlock getting it into all of the standard applications that people use, Llama, LM Studio, GenAI, etc. So it's going to get a lot easier, but the weights are available, the code is available, it's all open source, Apache 2.0. You can use it today.
That's awesome. Vic, congrats on this. What is this Hugging Face 0A100 space thing that you got as well? I was looking at this. I think, did they start giving A100s to demo spaces now?
Yeah, so 0 is like AWS Lambda, but for GPUs. So rather than having a provisioned GPU for your space, anytime a user comes in, there's a pool of GPUs and it pulls one and loads your model into it and runs it. Until recently, they had 8NGs, I think, available for this, but they switched to A100s. So there's a bit of latency if your model hasn't been tried out for a bit while it's loading it onto the GPU, but once it's on the GPU, it's super fast.
Nice. Even for a tiny model like this, I want to say A100 is probably like just poof and it appears.
Yeah.
Awesome. Vic, congrats on this and thanks for sharing with us. And folks, definitely give Vic a follow. Moondream, when I tested this when the first one released, I tested this against kind of significantly larger vision models and it performed very well, especially now that it's like Apache license. You can build it into your own pipelines. And I think the one thing to not miss from what you said is that there are specific vision models like YOLO and different things. And we have one of the YOLO masters, Skalski. Piotr is a friend of the pod and he trains these models and he has demos and videos of how to actually use them. It's significantly more complex than using a vision VLM, like Vic said. You have to learn this field. It's like the standard machine learning in vision field as well. Even though those models are tinier and probably run faster, some of them, I think YOLO can probably run in real time. Getting these tiny models to be able to talk to them, I think is significantly easier for many folks, and definitely check it out.
Yeah, just to clarify, Moondream is great for vision tasks. If you ask it to write a poem about an image or roast you or something, it's not going to do as well. Because the sole priority I had was like make a model that's really good at computer vision. And if you need more advanced reasoning, like you wanted to solve a math problem for you, like you take the outputs from Moondream and feed it into a bigger LLM. But Moondream's going to be great at vision tasks. Other stuff, not so much.
Absolutely. And if folks want to help, the link is in the top of the space. Go into the GitHub, give it a star, and check it out and give Vic feedback. Moving on, Vic, feel free to stick with us and chat about the next stuff. Speaking of folks who built and released things, Jan, you've been cooking and we've been waiting. So you want to tell us the end result of this set cooking?
Yeah, I've cooked two different interesting models this week. First one is a little bit of a surprise to myself as well. One of the experiments ended up being the top 7B model on Hugging Face at the moment, Hugging Face leaderboard. I suspect it a little bit, take it with a grain of salt. It's under investigation whether or not the model overfitted the leaderboard. I think that there's no attempt to overfit the leaderboard, but I'm always suspicious when something like this happens. But yeah, it's out there. Experiment 26, if you are interested in trying it out and maybe further fine-tuning this model or merging with it, it's yours. And another model, which is the Gemma continuous pre-trained that I'm working on for the past 2 weeks, had been released this morning. It's a continuous pre-train of Gemma and extended from 7B to 11B, and then continuously pre-trained on Hebrew and English, multilingual. There are other tricks that went into training this model. You're more than welcome to read the write-up that I did summarizing the whole thing. But benchmarks coming soon, I think that the model is really good. For the Hebrew part, put that aside, but just on the English part, I use Cosmopedia from Hugging Face, the new dataset. That is a replication of Pi based on Mixtral from Hugging Face. Really good dataset. I used it as the English part of the model. And that's about it. It was a long 2 weeks struggling with training Gemma, but it paid off, and the model is yours now. Enjoy.
Let's talk about the struggles with Gemma a little bit more, because definitely you're very vocal about this. What changed? Did they release anything else, or did the community just figure out, or did you figure out some stuff that you want to share?
Both. First, Gemma was trained using JAX on TPUs. Makes sense. It's from Google. But Google released I think even 4 different implementations of Gemma. Apparently, on the Torch version, there were subtle, tiny details that were different, but they are very hard to detect if you just follow the code. It's rounding errors, things that are done by default differently between PyTorch and JAX. And those things influence the training just silently. They don't crash your code, but when you train with those things, and the model is not 100% as it was trained initially, you're basically losing performance. It's suboptimal. It took, I think, 2 weeks, and it's still going on, for people to go meticulously through all the details to just clear everything out, since many people just felt a little bit confused that the model just didn't work that well, even though on paper and in general, it should be an extremely good model. It is trained for 6 trillion parameters, 6 trillion tokens, which is insane. But people just didn't see the performance, the qualitative performance of the model.
Yep.
So it got to be suspected, and just people are now investigating. For me, it is what it is. I started the training 2 weeks ago. I ended up with this suboptimal training, unfortunately. But I do continue, and I plan to nudge the model a little bit once all the bugs and issues are cleared out. I plan to just take the final architecture, my weights, and just nudge the model a little bit to clear out all the issues and get you all a better model. But yeah, it was a rough 2 weeks.
A rough 2 weeks, especially during the Hugging Face went down, and you had to check on your other model.
Oh yeah, that was hard. Very hard.
We did spend a bunch of quality time together, all of us, while this happened. So, Yam, how can folks try this out? And you mentioned something. You also have Hebrew GPT, and this model was just trained with the Hebrew stuff, but with less knowledge as well, right? Can you talk about the difference there?
Yeah, there are 2 models. One of them is called, Hebrew GPT is a model that is heavily trained for nearly 4 months straight on 300 billion tokens in Hebrew. It is a heavy project.
Wow.
And yeah, it was done at the summer, I think. Yeah, at the summer. But this one is basically because I have all the data, and we just detected, because people played with Gemma, and hours after it was launched, people already detected that the tokenizer probably was trained multilingually without Google announcing anything about it. Because many different people found out that the model is surprisingly good in languages that are not English, even though Google announced that the model is just English pre-trained. Just from our perspective, me and my buddies, we were looking at this and just thought to myself, wait, we have an opportunity here. If there are tokens in the model that are multilingual, and clearly the model has some bases, especially in Hebrew, we can just fine-tune it just a bit and get an extremely good model in Hebrew.
So it's missing just data.
Mm-hmm.
So it's capable, but it's missing data, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yep, because it was not specifically trained in Hebrew. It just saw a little bit, but you can clearly see that it has a basis in Hebrew. So what I did, I followed Llama Pro, which basically says that you can extend the model. You can just stretch it out, add more layers, and freeze the base model, such that you won't lose to catastrophic forgetting what the model already learned before. So you just train the extended blocks. I literally just added blocks and trained another language to these blocks only. Now I have a model that has the same base scores as before, but also know another language. That's the whole trick of this project, and it saves a lot of compute, pretty much.
Hey, that's super cool. Can you talk a little bit more about like how the blocks were arranged?
Yeah, sure. It is. If you follow the Llama paper, they tried the different configurations, like a mixture of experts and so on and so forth. They ended up, after experiments, that if you just copy couple of the attention blocks, just like that, just copy them and stretch the model, deepen it, and train only the blocks that you copied, leaving also all the originals in place, that experimentally gets to the best performance. So I did exactly that. I just followed exactly what they said in paper, and the result, it looks really well.
That's awesome. All right, so folks can check out the deeper dive that Yam usually writes up in the tweet that's pinned above with a lot of detail as well. And definitely give Yam a follow, because this is not the first time that Yam trains these things and then shares very verbosely. So Yam, thank you. And it's great to see that the Gemini efforts that you have been cooking finally turned into something, and we'll see more from this. I want to acknowledge that we've been here for an hour. There's one last thing that I want to talk about in open source stuff, and then we should talk about Claude 3, because like it's a big deal. So unless the rumors about today are true, Claude 3 will still be the biggest deal of the space. So let's quickly talk about this. So there's a paper that was released. It's called Tiny Benchmarks, evaluating LLMs with fewer examples, from folks, fairly familiar folks. Leshem Chosen is the most like standing out there name for me as well. Quick and cheap LLM evaluation. And the way I saw this paper is that Jeremy Howard, the same guy from AnswerAI that we've talked about before, he tweeted about this and says, hey, this looks like a really useful project that we can take tiny benchmarks and then make them run on our models significantly faster and spend significantly less GPU. And then Jeremy specifically tagged Pharrell here with us on stage about his project called Dharma. So Pharrell, let's talk about Dharma, and let's talk about this tiny benchmarks thing and why like smaller benchmarks are important. And I think I will just say that the way I learned about this is LDJ showed me weights and biases. When we did the weights and biases deep dive, he showed me Dharma there, and it looks super cool. So let's talk about this just briefly, and then we're going to talk about Claude afterwards.
Yeah, for sure. So about 6-7 months ago, I released Dharma. Basically, the idea was that we found that eval loss alone is not a really good indicator of model performance throughout a training run, specifically within a training run. And we were trying to find other ways of evaluating the model throughout the training run. And one idea was, let's take a statistically significant sample or subsample of the benchmarks out there, MMOU, ARC-C, and AGI eval, Big Bench, and so on, and use those subsets as markers of performance across these different downstream tasks. Of course, my opinion in benchmarks is that it's a good indicator, but just on MCQ format and so on. So it's not the only way you want to evaluate your model, but it's just added information you can have. You can basically collect the model's performance across different tasks and subjects, essentially quizzing it throughout the training run. And the recent paper that Jeremy mentioned, it came out about 2 weeks ago or something. It proves and validates this idea, which is awesome, because it does show that you can actually get a somewhat accurate picture of the performance on these benchmarks from a small sample of about 100 examples, which is very much in line with what we did with Dharma. We're actually going to release like a repo on GitHub for anyone to make their own Dharma datasets. It's been in the works for a few months, but got trailed away. But we're going to have that in the next few days. It's already on GitHub, but just like getting polished. Hopefully anyone can easily make their own eval datasets and run them during their training runs.
I want to stress how big deal this seemed to me when LDJ showed this to me as well, because in your weights and biases dashboard, you can basically look at the loss curve and try to understand, surmise. Many folks like you guys and Yam probably already have the instinct for, oh, something's going wrong with the loss curve. But then after the model is finished, many folks, only after that, they start doing evaluation. Many folks don't even do evaluations after that. But I think I saw the same thing also with Olmo from Allen Institute for AI, that they released everything end to end. I think they also had evaluations. Actually don't know if part of the training run or afterwards, but they definitely had this in the same view. And then LDJ, when you were showing me Dharma actually does a subset of those evaluations, maybe not as precise, right? It's not exactly the same, but you can definitely see from checkpoint to checkpoint when the model trains how potentially it could respond on those evals, and then just adds a bunch of information for you, which is, I think, great. And
look, even just with training loss and eval loss alone, we can't really tell whether the models. There's some things we can grasp, but it's not the full picture. Having this added information from these benchmarks is interesting because it does add another kind of dimension to the evaluation itself. And then you can break it down by all the different subjects. I can see if my model is generalizing well across all the different subjects. Sometimes you see, for instance, that the model gets better at math, but then it actually gets worse on law, for instance, or all these different kind of tiny markers of whether the model is getting better at specific subjects or not. Of course, you have to take into consideration always that this is benchmarks in the sense that it's MCQ based. You do want to go beyond that if you want to get a full picture, but this is a good way to eval your models. Also, with the tool we're releasing, you're going to be able to control the types of subjects that you can actually target, because not every single training run is the same, and you might be trying to achieve something very different than, let's say, a generalized model that's good at benchmarks, right? But with this tool, we're going to basically allow you to customize those data sets for your training run.
That's awesome. And I should say one thing that I remember as folks do eval on checkpoints, right? The model as it trains generates several checkpoints. The process there is slow, and I think that's the benefit, let's say, from weights and biases, which I feel like is a good place to plug as well. And I think LDJ, you remember you showed me otherwise folks would SSH the machine, download this weight, start running a separate process. And the importance of tiny benchmarks on Dharma is significantly faster evals. They're able to run probably as part of your training run as well, and expose the same with the same dashboard, so you don't have to deal with it, significantly improving everybody's life, which is what we're all about here in weights and biases. So definitely, folks, Pharrell is going to release the Dharma toolkit, you called it? What do you call this iteration of Dharma?
It's just, the repo is just called Dharma. I'll make a public post on Twitter. It's public right now, the repo, so you can use it. It's just it needs a bit of polishing, and so some features are not fully implemented yet. But everything should be good to go in the next day or so. I'll make a post on my Twitter, so just follow me, and you'll hear more about it there. And also in parallel, we're going to release kind of Dharma 2, which is going to basically be a cleaner version of Dharma 1 using this new code. You can actually just replicate it. We'll have the configs, examples, so you can just replicate it for yourself. And yeah, hopefully if anyone wants to contribute to this, there's a lot of different paths we can take to improve this and make this a toolkit for even more than just the downstream benchmarks like MMOU and ArcC and so on.
Awesome.
I've posted, by the way, in the comments to this space and in the Jumbotron, the repo that Pharrell has up right now. And the main technique of it is that while the benchmarks are not great evaluators, they can be very good at telling incremental changes, or if you did something good in the model, you can spot that. And with the Dharma technique, you only need to do about 100 questions instead of running the entire 65,000 question benchmark, and you will get a relatively accurate but very fast eval. So again, it's really good for people doing training and fine-tuning.
Folks, we've been at this for 2 hours. No other huge breaking news has broken since, and it doesn't feel like those rumors are coming true. If they are, we're probably going to do an emergency space and hop back in. But until then, I just want to thank everybody for being here for the last 2 hours. I'm going to do a recap of everything we talked about. If you joined us in the middle and you want to hear everything we've talked about, please stick around for the next 8 to 10 minutes. And then I'm going to let you go for the rest of the Thursday. And it's been a great space, even though I was a little bit sick and coughing at you, hopefully, but very thankful for the co-hosts here who picked up some of this conversation. It's been great. Folks who are joining just now to us, I just covered the last 2 hours that we had on the space, and we will see you. We'll see you next time. I don't think we had breaking news. I don't think there's anything that's worth sticking around to discuss. But with that, everything that we've talked about, all the links are going to be in the show notes and the newsletter. If you haven't signed up yet, please definitely feel free to do so on ThursdAI.news. Thank you everyone for joining. Nistan, Pharrell, Luigi, Akshay joined, and Ray as well. We had Jan before and some other folks as well. Thank you everybody in the audience who comes back from week to listen to us. And I will just remind you that next week is ThursdAI's birthday. We actually started this a year ago, and it's been crazy. I think we missed only one. So even that I was sick today, we didn't miss this one. Next week is going to be really fun, hopefully with GPT-5 news. All right, I'll see you everyone next Thursday. Bye-bye.